Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to Advanced Cognitive Processes. I am Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur, and this week we have been talking about various aspects of language. We began talking about what language is, we talked a little bit about the history of psycholinguistics, the aspects of language, we talked a little bit about acquisition of language, how a child acquires various aspects of language. In the last lectures, you also saw that we were talking about comprehension of language. Now, one of the very important aspects of language is being able to speak. Now, that's the basic form of how people interact. I mean, writing came much later. The first aspect of how did people start speaking? So, language production, that is speech, is one of the very important aspects of language, and I thought I'll use today's lecture to talk to you about production of language. So, let us begin. I mean, majority of human communication occurs via speech. Okay, speech includes a range of steps. Now, if you're talking about speech, it includes a range of steps from first conceptualizing about what you really have to talk about. Are you going to talk to me about your vacation? Are you going to describe to me about the dinner you had last night? Are you going to talk about some work that you've done and you want to explain to me? So it begins from conceptualizing an idea that the speaker, that is myself, wishes to communicate to you, and the speaker kind of then produces a series of behaviors. Okay, it does a few things, and that is basically what kind of converts this thought, this idea, into this sound. So speech production is basically converting this thought, the idea that I wanted to talk about, into the sound that you are hearing. So this is what I will be talking about in today's lecture. Now, the second aspect of speech production is the listener, wherever this is going. So the listener then has to analyze and manage the acoustic signal that is coming out from my mouth, and then the kind of the listener will have to run backwards from this. So he will have to decipher from this sound into whatever I had intended to mean. So speaker goes from the idea to the sound, and the listener goes from the sound to the idea. That is the entire aspect of communication. And these communications could be about anything. There could be a compliment conversation, it could be a conversation about the weather of the day, or it could be a conversation about lunchtime, or so on and so forth. So these are the various ways in which people interact with each other as they talk about so many things. Sometimes there is a need and want communication, sometimes there is just plain gossip, sometimes there is a description, so on and so forth. So let us try and understand what speech production is about. To understand how speech is produced, one should have a theory about describing about what the mental representations are that support the translation from the idea to the sound. So how do you represent something that is non-verbal, that is an idea, to a format and bring it to a format that is verbal? Okay, so the mental plan that causes the muscles to move, the vocal apparatus to start moving, is basically referred to as articulation. Speech basically requires exquisitely tight control over more than around 100 muscles which are in your vocal tract, the lips and the teeth and the tongue and the vocal cords, all of that. Okay, so again, see, it is starting from the idea, it is starting from something that is completely metaphysical to something that has to move. So this is something which we are going to talk about now. And some important questions about this phenomena is that you have to know what are the steps that are needed. What is it that you need to do to retrieve the linguistic representation you actually need to have in order to present an idea. Suppose I want to talk about my vacation. Now, if I have to talk about my vacation, and let us say I spent my vacation in a hilly area somewhere, the idea is, how do I, what is the word for snow, or what is the word for cloud? Do I have enough words for, suppose, feeling cold? Do I have enough words for describing scenic beauty? Sometimes you would see people come up with sentences like, it was so beautiful that it was hard to describe in words. I was talking about word comprehension in one of the earlier lectures. Now, for a speaker, this is actually a problem. A speaker needs to figure out what are the words that will convey the reality. So this is a very important question. So what are the steps? What are the linguistic representations that I am going to use in order to describe this event, this scene, this reality? That is one very important question. The second is, suppose I have those representations now. I have the word for, I have exquisite beauty, I have eclectic beauty, scenic beauty, or so many different words I might have. How am I going to use these words? What kind of sentences I am going to form? How am I going to put one word before the other in, in doling out a particular sentence? So this is something which is again something very interesting, something one has to figure out. Once you have these two things, you have to also convert this thing into a form that the motor system, speech is a motor act. Speech is basically done by your vocal cords, by your lips and by your teeth and by your tongue. From that idea, you're looking, you're standing on a terrace looking down on the mountains, the snow is falling and the clouds are below you, from there to how do you start moving these muscles? This is the third very important problem. How do you use those representations? How do you translate them into a form that the motor system, this vocal apparatus, can generate the actual sounds, the physical gestures? Okay, so this is basically in a nutshell the three very important aspects of production of speech, and we will in this course of this lecture try and look at various aspects of these things. So speech has three things. It has first conceptualization, thinking of something to say, what am I going to talk about? Second is formulation, figuring out a good way to express the idea, given the tools in your language. What are the words in your language? Some languages have exquisite vocabulary, Urdu for that matter has exquisite vocabulary, Malayalam has very good vocabulary, Hindi also has very good vocabulary, but these vocabularies are different, figuring out a good way to say it. The third is moving the muscles to produce the actual sound. So this is the third task that you would want to do. Let us talk about, I wanted to describe all of these processes, so I am taking help of an approach which is William Levell's production theory. It is encapsulated in a model called the Weaver++ model. So now I am going to talk about all of these three processes in the bounds of this particular model. I am going to use this model as a tool to demonstrate all of this. So Levell's model actually starts with at the top, conceptual preparation in terms of lexical concepts. What are lexical concepts? I will talk to you about them in a while. Lexical concepts are words. Then you have, once you select once you activate so many lexical concepts, then you have to do lexical selection. Then you have to talk about lemma. I will talk about what a lemma is in a while. Then you have to do morphological encoding. You have to construct these words. Remember one of the earlier lectures I was talking about morphology. Then you have to do the phonological encoding. You have to put together the sounds. How do you bring the sounds together? Then you have the phonological word, what exactly you are going to say. Then you have to have the phonetic encoding part. What is the manner in which I produce these sounds? Then you will have something called a phonetic gestural score, the articulatory plan, and so on and so forth. Finally, you will be able to articulate this, which will be a sound that you produce. Now also, once you produce the sound, it's not that you're not hearing what you're speaking. So there has to be a feedback from once the articulation has happened to the top levels of this model, so that some feedback loop is there. Again, I've just very briefly just mentioned this model. Let me now detail this model a little bit so that you understand what are the various intricacies of these levels. So this model is the Weaver++ model. One of the goals of this model is to describe the intermediate steps between activating an idea and activating the sounds that are needed to express the idea. That is one of the tasks. Now speech production is viewed as involving a sequence of mental processes. And what are these mental processes? Each mental process accomplishes a sub-goal, and the output of one mental process acts as an input for the other mental process. If you look at this figure again, and I'll keep coming back to this, it is something of a serial kind of a thing. You accomplish one step, then you go to the second step, then you go to the third step. Whatever comes out of this step is a input for this one, and whatever comes out of this one is an input for the next one. So this is something which we'll talk about. The first step here, if you look at this one here, is the idea of the lexical concept. The lexical concept, very simply, is an idea for which your language has a label, or for which your language has a word. A lot of things your language, my language, has words for. A lot of things it does not. So you use whatever existing words are there to come up with such a concept. Okay. Again, the concept is, say, for example, there is a word for a female horse, that is mare, but there is no word for a female elephant. So then you will use female and elephant, and then you will use this plainly. So to express the latter idea, you will just combine whatever is existing and come up with a female elephant. Can all ideas be neatly expressed with individual words? Not really. Again, we always need a stage of processing that takes our non-linguistic, our idea or the visual form, and finds the most probable lexical or linguistic forms to really have this translation from what you are seeing to what you are going to talk about. Again, this process here from converting to what you are seeing to what you are actually speaking about, producing, is called lexicalization. Lexicalization is the process that serves as the interface between the non-language thought processes, the reality that you're seeing, and the linguistic systems that have the ability to produce verbal expressions. You're seeing an exquisite scene, and from that scene to actually describing that in words, poetry, and different kind of forms, this interface is called lexicalization. Okay, so remember it is a very important aspect. Lexicalization involves a few things I'll talk about. First is, if your language has a word for the idea that you wish to express, the first thing you will have is you will activate lexical concepts. You will activate an idea that is expressible in a word. So I want to talk about whatever I'm seeing from my terrace. I see a cloud, I see snow, I see people walking by. So I have words for all of this. Now this is what I am going to talk about. The second is, now I have so many things available. So clouds are referred to as balls of snow, so many different kind of things. Or suppose, for example, there are people going by, so I can talk about men, women, children, so many different things. So some selection has to happen. You will activate so many different things. Okay, you will activate so many different things, so many competing concepts. So a lexical selection is basically when a language will have more than a number of different words that are close in meaning to the idea that you want to talk about. You will need to select one of them to be able to talk about that. Okay. Now, for example, you have these memory representations. All of these are getting activated. One of which has to be selected for production. Only one of these you will select for really speaking. The process is called a lexical selection. So you came to lexical concepts, you activated so many of them, then you selected one of them. So you achieved a lexical selection. Once you've done the lexical selection, you will come up with what is called a lemma. What is a lemma? Lemma is a mental representation that reflects an intermediate stage between activating an idea and activating the speech sounds. Everything in the middle till you are finally approaching it. What is this? Lemma incorporates two things. It incorporates word meaning, what do you intend to convey, and syntax. It is singular, plural, person, thing, object. All of those kind of features are encapsulated in this concept called lemma. I'll talk about this in a bit more detail now. Okay, so once you've activated set of lemmas, all of this is what I am going to talk about. Then what you will do is you would want to activate the words. You will start putting the words together. Am I going to talk about plural, a he or a she or a object or a person? All of these information, because you have now an activated lemma, are there with you. Once they are there with you, you will undertake a process called morphological encoding. What is morphological encoding? Morphemes, if you remember, are basic units of language representation. Morphological processing is important because words appear in different forms. So if you remember, I was talking about in the chapter on language acquisition about things like kicks, kicked, kicking. I wanted to talk about some event that somewhere somebody is kicking. Now kicking is happening or kicking has already happened, those kind of things are there in my lemma. I have to now put together a word that represents this lemma information. This is what morphological encoding will help me do. So Level kind of talks about something called morphological specification. He says that each word that we know has something of a morphological specification, and this morphological specification is what will tell us how is the word going to behave in a given sentence. Am I going to talk about kicking, that is a continuous event? Am I going to talk about kicked, that is a perfect event, something that has already happened, and so on and so forth. So I started from an idea, I had many lexical concepts, I did lexical selection, then I went to lemma, now I have a lemma. Now what I am doing is I am doing morphological encoding, one of the sub processes of which is morphological specification. I am just specifying what word form am I going to use. So the morphological specification for the word eat includes that eat is a root form, and that is past tense is ate. So now you see, if I have to talk about that X ate my burger, I have to have this idea there. I cannot use X eat my burger or X is eating my burger because that's already happened. I have to have an idea that X ate my burger. Ate is basically derived from root form eat, and ate basically represents the past tense of eat. Things like that. Now, the form of the word that I am going to use eat, ate or eating is basically, that is what is specified in the morphological specification, and this would precisely change basically on the depending on the lemma that I have received, that is activated. So this is something which you have to keep in mind. Now, having selected a number of selected a set of morphemes to produce, morphological encoding will activate the speech sounds. What is exactly that you're going to speak? Eat and eating will require different kind of phonemes to get activated, and then once you have this selection of sounds close by, then this will form the basis for coming up with an articulatory plan. You need to tell your motor apparatus, the vocal apparatus, to start preparing for producing something, but you will not be able to do that till the morphological specification is found, because you have to be be knowledgeable, or you have to be informed of the fact that whether you are going to use eat, ate or eating. Again, started from an idea, lexical concepts, lexical selection, lemma, then morphological encoding, morphological specification as to what exact word form you are going to use, then you go to the phonemic part. I will talk about that. So the speech sound one produces depends upon the morphemes that one has activated, that one intends to use, and also these morphemes have to be organized in the right sequence to ensure that the right sounds are produced in the right order. Now, why am I talking about right sounds in the right order? Because speech is such, speech is incremental, one sound comes after the other, and this order has to be respected, because that is how you will create correct speech. Okay, so let's move ahead. Let us try and summarize what we have till now. We have concepts, we had lexical concepts, lexical selection happened, then we have lemma, then we had morphological specification, then you have morphemes. What is it that you have to activate? Then you have speech sounds, phonemes have to be there. Okay, this is middle of the entire chain. Let us move ahead now. Once you have the morphemes slotted into the right positions, you can now start activating the individual speech sounds. You have to activate, so this has to be happening in a correct order. What we normally think of a word is actually referred to as a lexeme. Again, in this model or in reference to the mental lexicon, the actual word is referred to as a lexeme. Now, lexeme, in order to produce the lexeme, what you need to do is you need to activate a set of sounds which are making up this lexeme, which are kind of constituting this lexeme. And you have to organize them into a particular slot. E, t, ing has to be organized in 1, 2, 3 slots so that you are able to produce it correctly. Now, evidence that there is a lexeme, I will just kind of digress and give you some evidence that this actually happens. Evidence for the fact that lexeme is a really psychological level of representation. Some studies were done using homophones. Now, what is a homophone? Homophone is a word which has the same sound but different meaning. Now, suppose you have the words like but, beauty has different meaning and beauty has a different meaning, but both of them sound so similar. So these are referred to as homophones. In English, but occurs, beauty but occurs more frequently than beauty but. Okay, so more often than not, you will kind of take probably the more frequent thing. Now, in most common production models that are going around by in the day, both the versions but and but will activate the same kind of lexeme, because they sound so similar to each other, because the lexeme represents how the word is pronounced, and both the versions are pronounced in much the same way. But and but, it's basically the same thing. There is no sound level discrepancy here. Both of them have the same set of phonemes. But if both of them have the same set of phonemes, they should experience what is called the frequency inheritance effect. Frequency inheritance is basically, if a word has a high frequency twin, you should be able to produce both of them in the same manner, because beauty but is less frequent, beauty but is more frequent, but the fact is that anyways you have to activate the same set of sounds, so you will activate beauty but as easily as you will activate BUT but. This is what the frequency inheritance effect is. So conversely, it could happen that if one of the members of this pair has a very low frequency, then that could also in some sense figure on kind of rub on to the other level. So we will see, say suppose there is a word called flex, F-L-E-C-K-S, and a word called flex as in flexible, F-L-E-X. Sometimes because flex is so less frequent, it might rub on to the other one, flex as well. So again, this is the frequency inheritance effect, because your practice with producing the same kind of sounds together is high in some case, high in a pair, both of them benefit. If it is low, then both of them kind of suffer. Just going there. Now experiments have been done involving picture naming. People just give pictures and people other participants have to name it, and they were looking for this frequency inheritance effect, as do experiments involving translation from languages as well. Now in both cases, low frequency words were produced faster if they had a higher frequency twin. If you have been practicing speaking a higher frequency partner of a low frequency word, the low frequency word also is produced a little bit faster. BUTT but is low frequency, BUT but is high frequency. If you are speaking but again and again, and if this word BUTT comes there, you will probably pronounce it slightly faster because this one has been practiced a lot. Okay, so the time it takes you to produce the word is not really based solely on how frequently the word's meaning is used, but also on how frequently you have been using a particular collection of sounds. Suppose I am talking about flexible. Now able is something which probably you are not really using so much, but flex, maybe if you are using, you have been talking in some sense about flex and so many things. The thing is, because you have had practice with this sound, flex and flexible, the idea is that the same kind of sound, because you have been practicing, will rub on and you will be able to produce it faster. Does not really have to do with meaning in this case so much. Now let us kind of come back to the thing. I kind of digressed a little bit to give you a demonstration. Now once you have had the phonemes, you can start organizing these phonemes into slightly larger chunks called syllables. So you started from lexical concept, selection, lemma, morphological encoding, morphological specification. Now you had what are the phonemes you want to put together. Now these phonemes are not always just organized by single phonemes. They are organized into syllables. This process of putting each syllable, putting across phonemes as syllables is called syllabification. Okay, so producing each syllable will require a coordinated set of actions, and each set of actions will need to be planned. Let me demonstrate this to you. Now before you speak, you need to really figure out how to map the activated set of phonemes into these syllables. This process is referred to as syllabification. And how do you do it? Let me give you an example. Syllabification involves two processes. First is activating a metrical structure and inserting the individual speech sounds into positions, right positions in the metrical structure. If you remember, I was talking about this in the child language acquisition lecture when I was talking about trochaic and iambic stress patterns. What is a trochaic stress pattern? You have words like bottle and stuff like that, wherein the first letter is first syllable is stress and the second is less stress, and you have iambic when the first syllable is less stress, second one is more stress. Okay, so in those kind of things, if you have to say banana and banana is a word or Panama is a word, you will have to kind of generate such a structure wherein what is the aspect that you need to emphasize, what is the aspect that you need to less emphasize, and you have to slot your phonemes into these more emphasized and less emphasized slots so that you get the correct pronunciation, correct manner of speaking them right. Okay, so this metric structure needs to be arranged. The metrical structure consists of syllable sized units, as I was saying. In addition to specifying the number of syllables, you need also the metrical structure does something. It indicates the relative emphasis. This is what I was referring to. Indicates the relative emphasis or loudness that you need to associate to each of these syllables. Suppose the word banana has an accent on the second syllable, banana, b is smaller, nana is bigger. The word Panama has accent on the first syllable, Panama, actually it's said Panama. So Panama is more stress on the first one, ama is the second one is slightly less signifying. Both of these words have the similar set of similar number of syllables, but the idea is the stress patterns are different here. So if you have to speak something correctly, you don't really need to only have the set of phonemes. You need to figure out how are these phonemes going to be structured into syllables, A. You also need to figure out what is the metrical structure, where is the emphasis going to be, whether the emphasis is going to be on the first set of syllables or the second set of syllables, and both of these information you will use in order to come up with the final pronunciation. So, the metrical structure for banana would be, say, you can see the figure here, there will be stress on the second one and double stress on the third one, and for Panama will be there is first and there is a stress on the first one, and second and third is much lesser. Each symbol here stands for a syllable, and the dash mark you can see stands for the stress. So, if you see banana, ba-na-na, the stress is on the second syllable. Panama, the stress is on the first, the second two are, and the second and third are kind of non-stressed. So, this is again, this is the detail in which your system has to really work out how to speak, how to speak in syllables, what are the stress patterns going to be like, what are the relative loudness patterns going to be like. So, in that sense, it's a far cry that you've come from the idea till the sounds, but again, here there is also a lot of work that needs to be done. Let's move ahead, again talking a little bit about whether syllabification is actually a reality. So, evidence for the fact that syllabification is a real mental process that intervenes between morphological processing and articulation can be found in the in the studies of the way that people speak. Suppose you want to ask somebody to speak escorting. So, typically you will see that morphemically this is like escort and ing. So, escort and ing should be spoken. But if you really pay attention to how people are really speaking, people are actually speaking escorting. So, they are actually having 3 syllables. The stress is on S, then cor, and then ting. That basically means that the syllabification process has produced the have kind of taken the T morpheme from escort and pushed it to a different syllable. So, escorting comes to the third one, but technically morphemically escort, cort should be in one and ing should be there, but again the way you've divided it in syllable fashion, you've put S, cor and ting. So, the ting has been pushed, T has been pushed to the last syllable. This is again, so we do not really, this is one way this is achieved. So, if you again take a step back, look back, see where we've come from, we are not really activating just morphemes and we are not just activating phonemes that go with each morpheme, we have to do this in particular sequence. So, instead after the morphemes are activated, you have calculated the best way to organize those morphemes or sounds into a sequence of syllables, and it is the syllables that will basically serve as the template for production. So, from morphological specification you had, this is the word I have to produce. From that you had those sounds, but before you could actually start articulation of sounds, you had this intervening level called syllabification, wherein you organize those sounds into syllables and into relative loudness and less loud patterns, and then this syllabification basically is what is serving as the template for how your articulation will proceed. So, it's true even when the process is responsible for calculating syllables lump together phonemes from different words. Suppose he will escort us. Now, escort us should be there, but sometimes you will see the way people speak is escort us, TUS, that will come together. This is something which is generally happening. So, while you need morphemes and words to plan what to say, speech does not really just involve activating the speech sounds in individual words. Instead, the speech planning system activates a set of morphemes and words, and then it figures out the best way to organize morphemes and words into sets of syllables. Sometimes the syllables will respect the real morphemic boundaries, sometimes they will not. But again, syllable is the template for production of speech. Levitt and Wheelton kind of said this in 1994, and they say speakers do not really concentrate on citation forms of words, the way words are written in dictionaries, but they create rhythmic, pronunciable metrical structures. How is it easy to speak this word? And the entire production of speech is kind of governed using these metrical structures. Okay. So, once you have done syllabification, you started from a lexical concept, you selected, you did lexical selection, then you went into getting a lemma, then the lemma helped you to do morphological encoding helped you do morphological specification, which form of word you have to speak, then you had phonemes, but you chunk those phonemes into syllables, metrical structure, and so on and so forth. Now you have the set of things that you actually want to produce. This set of what you actually wanted to produce, which comes out of syllabification, gives you what are called phonological words. This is what you are going to speak. These are phonological components that you will finally articulate. In the Weaver++ model, a phonological word is basically referred to as a set of syllables that is produced as a single unit. Remember, escorting is going to be produced 3 different syllables. So escort and us technically are 2 different lemmas, but when you see he will escort us, escort and us are 2 phonological words. Okay, so you have to kind of pay a little bit of attention here and get to the fact that morphemically word structures are different, but the way you speak, the phonological word form will be different from the morphological word form here. Okay. Now, according to the Weaver++ model, you can begin to speak as soon as you have activated all the syllables in a given phonological word. That is where your articulation will now start. So you have to plan each utterance by activating a number of lemmas and morphemes simultaneously. You plan the actual speech movements based on the one phonological word at a time. So escort, us, escort, and us, 3 words, and this is where you will start producing an articulatory plan. Also, you plan your these movements of the muscles. You need to produce each word 1 syllable at a time in a left to right fashion. You cannot, suppose you have escort us is ready, you will not really kind of activate us first and cort later and then s. Okay, it has to be sequentially in a left to right fashion, because as soon as this is going to get activated, you have to do the articulation in the same order as well. Remember, speech is something that is unfolding in time and is happening sequentially. Okay, so you activate the phonemes for the syllables that come first. So you will activate s first, then you activate cort, and then you activate tus. Okay, so this is how this process will move further. Now, the evidence for this left to right activation, again, what is the evidence that we are doing this activation in left to right fashion, has been shown in studies of phoneme monitoring, and what they've shown is that if people are trying to look at a picture and they try to say a word that describes the picture as quickly as possible, this is one of the tasks that was given to people. The second task that was given is that you have to be monitoring a target phoneme, and as soon as that target phoneme comes, you press a button. So I am showing you pictures. The pictures will obviously have particular phonological words, and I will tell you that when this sound comes, you press a button. Okay, so if you are asked to name a picture of a rabbit and the phonemes are R or B, you should press a button as quickly as possible, and you should refrain from responding if the target phoneme to monitor is K. Okay, so you have to say rabbit, target phonemes are R or B, and if you see K, you don't respond. This is the task. What happens? People can do this phoneme monitoring task very accurately. Okay, and they respond a little bit faster if the target phoneme comes from the beginning of, if the target phoneme is R, then you are quicker compared to when the target phoneme is B, you are slightly, you will take a bit of time, because it is happening incrementally, or you are activating this incrementally. Okay, so people respond to this kind of task a little bit faster if the target phoneme comes from the beginning of the word than if the target phoneme comes from the middle or the end of the word. This was taken as evidence for the fact that we are activating these things sequentially from the left to right. Now, once you have activated these things, you already have what the output of the speech process is. This is what you have to move your muscles and produce, and this is what the listener will hear. So let us summarize how this model has worked. Production begins with a set of ideas that the speaker wishes to express. In the next step, these ideas are tied to lexical concepts because of the language, because different languages have specific words for these ideas. Second is, after a set of lexical concepts have been activated, lemmas are corresponding lemmas are also activated. Then from lemma you provide information about the morphological properties of the word, morphological encoding and specification are done. After you have activated a set of morphemes, you organize these into a sequence, and the speech sounds that are required to be activated are placed in a sequence. So you do syllabification. Phonological encoding involves 2 things. It involves the activation of metrical structures and syllabification. Outcome of this process is a set of phonological words and which are basically chunked into syllable size frames. Banana, banana are three things that you're going to produce. During phonetic encoding, now we are moving further than this, the speech production system conserves a set of stored representations of specific syllables. How is this thing produced? So, cat versus cut. So, how is this syllable actually produced? This is what is stored, and the phonetics will basically decide how you are going to produce a particular set of syllables. So, the system activates appropriate syllable representations and places them into proper positions in the frame. This is how it has to be said. So, for example, banana, the second has to be stressed, first does not have to be stressed, third does not have to be stressed. This representation is later used by the motor system, and the motor system creates what is called a phonetic gestural score, which is the representation which is the motor system is going to use to plan the actual muscle movements. So, you have the phonological words. From the phonological words, you kind of come out with stress pattern planning, and then what you create is called a phonetic gestural score. This is how your muscles will move to create the word forms. So, this is now the plan is there, everything is there. Now, the final thing what you have to do is you have to do the articulation, you have to actually speak something out. Now, I am just kind of we are kind of done with this speech production part. I am just kind of spending a couple of minutes here. What is articulation? Now, ultimate goal till this point I was talking about speech planning. Hai na? So, ultimate goal of speech planning is to make speech muscles move and the listener hear whatever the sound is coming out. This aspect is called articulation. To be able to speak, we have to configure our vocal tracts, which consists of everything from the vocal folds upwards, from the neck upwards to our lips and noses and teeth and tongue and everything. Articulation is both the end point of speech planning and production and the starting point for speech comprehension. From speech planning, you created the sound. For a listener, this is the beginning point of speech comprehension. Now, there are multiple accounts of speech articulation that you will come across. Some accounts of speech articulation classify speech sounds according to the way the articulators move. So, you would have heard of things like labials, bilabials, stops and other kind of things. The articulators basically include things like the lips, the tongue tip, the tongue, the velum, that is soft palate towards the back, and the glottis, which is the structure of your throat. These different articulators can be moved and semi-independently of each other, and they can be used to stop or perturb the flow of air, and these disturbances from the flow of air is basically what will create the different phonetic contrast, different ways a particular sound is produced. According to articulatory phonology theory, the outcome of the speech planning process is phonetic gestural score. Gestural score creates a contrastive gesture, which is basically creates the the way in which you can differentiate between different sounds. A gesture that creates a noticeable difference between the current speech signal and other signals that the language implies. What will this help is, this will help you tell the articulators on how to move, what is it that you need to do in order to produce this or execute this gestural plan. Then it includes 3 or 4 things. It includes moving a particular set of articulators towards a location in the vocal tract where the constriction of air has to happen. What is the degree of constriction? Does the air completely stop or a little bit? And it is a very characteristic, it's happening in a very dynamic fashion. So, this is a little bit of a physics of production of speech. I am not really going into a lot of detail, but the idea is, what you have to remember is still the speech planning part, and also how the speech planning is executed using these different articulators. Now, the movement of these articulators, the tongue tip, the tongue, the velum and all of those kind of things basically produces a set of speech sounds, which is phonemes, and that can be basically classified according to the basis of place of articulation, manner of articulation, whether it is voiced or unvoiced, those kind of things. In a different day or a different lecture, I could probably explain about these different things as well, but I think I'll kind of limit myself to this, and this is basically what the production of speech looks like. Now, further, also a little bit something that I would want to just talk about is you have to remember that we do not really produce phonemes in isolation. If you're saying what we do is we produce whole gangs of whole bunches of phonemes together. Okay, when we talk at the average of around one phoneme every 100 milliseconds. So your kind of sounds are always meshing into each other. You know, you don't really produce one sound, give a gap, another sound, give a gap. It's not like this. Just one sound is kind of, you know, just meshing into the other sound. This process basically is referred to as co-articulation. Because you're producing so many phonemes in such a short period of time, we have to figure out ways of transition from moving from one phoneme to other. And this moving from one phoneme to other, what you do is you do co-articulation. What is co-articulation? Co-articulation basically is gestures from one phoneme are overlapping in time with gestures for the other phoneme. Suppose for example the word is pool. When you say pool, you make a completely different sound, as you know, you kind of the way you speak the p here is very different as compared to when you say pan. The sound, the phoneme p sound is exactly the same, but the gestural thing is very different. Okay, so these are referred to as co-articulation effects. Basically, co-articulation is affecting both the production and perception of speech. The way you move your articulators for the phoneme p changes depending upon which phoneme is coming next. So if is coming, so the p sound is produced differently. If u is coming, the p sound is produced differently. You can actually do this pool and pan. You'll see the, you know, even the airflow is slightly different. So this is what I think altogether what I had about speech production. I've tried to cover almost everything in here, and so this is pretty much, you have to just remember, you start from a lexical, you start from an idea, pick up lexical concepts, select something, move to the lemmas, do the morphological encoding, then you get the phonemes, you do the phonological encoding by doing syllabification, then you kind of come to the articulatory plan, then you have the gestural score, finally you are able to articulate what you have thought about. I hope you never thought about that this entire process is so complex. This is what speech production looks like. I'll talk to you about a different thing about language in the next lecture. Thank you.